testing into production. For the first, I hope everybody knows what production meant for the ones who are not software related. Production is when software goes in the hand of the customer. He has it. 2011, Amazon wrote a beautiful article saying, we go into production every 11 seconds. Wow. And we all thought, ha, ha, ha. They owned the product. The customer doesn't get the Amazon page in their environment. We customer use the product while Amazon still has it. That makes a huge difference. So testing into production is completely sector dependent. Netflix also tests into production. Amazon tests into production. They can fall back any minute, any second. The very first moment something goes wrong, they can fall back to their solution because they own the product. Now let's move to the telecommunications. You produced a node. By the way, I come from the telecommunications. I was 22 years by Ericsson. You produce a node and you bring it to Vodafone, for example, and put it in the middle of a network while 2 million people in London is speaking on the phone, and you have a multi-vendor setup with nodes from Huawei and Nokia and I don't know how many multi-vendor systems. And there you get a problem. What do? The product is already by the customer. Falling back is a mess. So there is the very first important factor to consider when we speak about production. Now, before I move on, we're going to make a small quiz. Please, you have a Menti link in your chat. Could you please give me an impression what your feelings are about testing right at the customer hands? That is production, actually. We have this Menti, and Roy has really, with the speed of light, set up a small questionnaire. I think I'm going to hire Roy. I need this guy. Okay. Well, you're fantastic optimistic, everybody. Very positive people.
Very advanced response, actually.
Very advanced as well. Absolutely. Wow. I'm happy. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much.
Shall I hide the screen again? Bring you back?
Yes, we can hide it again. Yes, probably. I mean, no answer is right or wrong. That's the good thing with this Mentimeter. Nobody failed. I will say maybe. That will be my answer. Depends on the sector. Depends what production means. Like I said, telecommunication, the node, let's take an example, is in the hand of Vodafone. And you might have very hard contracts. What happens economically if there's a failure in production? That still plays also a role. What is the contracting issue for production's mistake? Is the customer also ready to accept having a problem there? So going back to Netflix, Spotify, Amazon, all these amazing companies we show off because they test completely into production. Like I say, yes, it's very simple for them, and they have a very new architecture. What second point? Number one was what's your sector? Number two, what is your architecture like? Do you have a modern architecture with microservices set up in Kubernetes, or do you have a legacy setup which still has some programming language from the 70s running? Some people smile. There are some programs with COBOL running out there. Testing into production, you run into companies who have a legacy where nobody in the company understands the program. Actually, they lost control of it. The people who create the architecture left the company. I don't know if I will test into production there. So the second point is, what is your architecture like? Does it allow this testing into production? Now, to be honest, I will say before you start testing into production, there's no 0 or 1. What you can do is reduce the number of positions where you can run a test. From the very moment you produce the code until go into productions, you have companies. I'm going to speak about Git, that is the repository for code, which is mostly used. You have companies with 6 or 7 different steps, like pre-production, like master, like testing, like team branch. We call it in the software branches. No, imagine the Thamesis with a bunch of branches of different rivers coming down. Reduce the number of branches. So you may not have to test into production right away. Maybe you can test in pre-production. Exactly, Claire, very good point. Claire writes, also depends not only the speed you roll out, but the easy you can roll back recovery. Exactly. How good is your recovery? That would be my number 3 point. I was moving to number 4. Sector you have, architecture you have, what is your recovery strategy? If you don't have any, I will think twice about testing into production because Murphy is alive in production. So like I say, the first step you can do if you consider going for testing into production, which is very healthy, is can you reduce the number of pre-production branches? Can you get closer to production? Like try not to test on team branches, please. Maybe test on feature branches is a step ahead. Maybe test on product branches. How close can you get to production to run your test? The closer you are to production testing, the better. And if you can test into production, hallelujah. If you cannot, and in the telecommunication, we don't test into production because Vodafone with the VMUs, we have pre-production setups with a simulator. We simulate the network of the customer. It is good enough. We get most of the test problems there. So there are some compromise for some sectors. What is the recommended first step for organizations that are hiding waterfall with Agile terms? Okay, well, we cannot save the world, put it this way. I will hold on the first step. Can we show off in pre-production at our company? That will be my personal impression. Try to show off with your pre-production. And if they are having waterfall with Agile terms, there we are in a very, very dark area. I hope this answer was okay. The question was very wide. The question came in, how do you fulfill regulatory and compliance requirements before releasing to customer? Very good point. You might have, for example, a working Austria with the company running the flight controller software. If this software has one single mistake, we have a problem when we fly it. So they have very strong regulatory test requirements. In these cases, I will say something which is so strongly related, like the flight controller software, you mostly don't test in production. Here, I strongly recommend to have a pre-production setup with a very good simulation with VMware, for example, virtual machines. We had a completely a telecommunication network completely simulated in VMware, where our integration test was running, for example. So before you get to production, you have to done some homework before. So you cannot just produce your software, run continuous integration, say, fine, we go to production. There has to be in between some homework. Any other opinions than mine, actually?
In that situation, Almudena, how would we manage our expectation of continuous deployment or continuous delivery? Because you mentioned that make sure you have a pre-production setup live-like. So are those companies are never going to do continuous release or?
Very good point. We have continuous deployment, continuous release, continuous delivery. The three of them are completely mixed up in the literature. I personally, that is my personal humble experience, I don't believe in continuous release except for Amazon, Spotify, Netflix, of course. Like if you are bringing your product to the customer decides when he's receiving. So I don't believe in continuous release for most of the sectors, of course. Now, between continuous deployment and continuous delivery, there is a lot of confusion. So the definitions are not unique. So there we have to keep an eye, what does your company understand by continuous delivery or continuous deployment? For me, continuous deployment is pre-production. That means the product is ready to release as soon as the customer wants to have it in the hand. But like I say, if you don't like my definition, is perfectly okay because it's not there's not a unique definition for continuous delivery and continuous deployment in the literature.
But in my case, company itself is a customer. So I'm the customer and it's my product and it's my product. So I want to get it released every now and then.
Every now and then. Every now and then, that's the important. So how often is every now and then? Every day, every 2 weeks, every month? That is release on demand. That is not continuous.
Okay.
I hope this was any help.
It depends. It depends company to company. So I think I'll get better answer from the way we want to prepare the approach.
You're
There is
surely
no
getting
generic answer. Yeah.
better answers than me, and can only tell you from my experience.
Yeah.
And it will be very interesting to know what is your sector. But
Gambling.
generally speaking, continuous delivery and continuous deployment has to be concrete, defined for you. Mostly is this continuous delivery, pre-production, and you as a customer decide when you get it. And that can be once a week, perfectly okay. But then it's the continuous is broken. Then it's like in the telecommunication, they say release on demand. Okay, what do we have? But very, very interesting questions, guys. Thank you very much. This is really fun. What to do if your system processes a lot of data? Well, most of the testing runs in the cloud anywhere. I hardly know any far testing or production on site with home hardware. So most of the production testing runs on the cloud. I assume we will have to define what lot means. I assume that shouldn't be a problem. I mean, when we do overload testing the telecommunication, we simulate in a network that 100,000 subscribers are speaking on the phone at the same time. So that's a lot of data. And we have been doing that 10 years already. So that shouldn't be the problem.
So it was me that asked that question. It was more I was thinking about being able to roll it. So if you actually, if they're wrong, how do you undo or store that data? There's a lot of it.
Excuse me, Claire, that your sound is not very good. Maybe you can write it in the chat, because I had problems understanding. There was
the question is, what if you have to roll back your data?
Yeah, we spoke about it in my mini short teaser. You have to do your homework regarding rolling back. I mean, that is an impressive thing what Netflix has been doing already for years with the monkeys. They are completely prepared for recovery. So that is not important how good your going into production is. It is exactly less important how good can you come back to the situation before. And of course, Claire, you're right. There's a lot of data configuration involved. You have to reconfigure back to the situation you had before. So from this point of view, I assume when you want to do testing into production that you have done your homework before. Thank you. You have a question. If you don't test in production, how can you test third-party service? Simulation, simulation, simulation. I mentioned VMware. There are other simulations environment. If you can simulate a complete telecommunications network where 100,000 subscribers are speaking at the same time, everything simulated, you can simulate almost every sector. So third-party services, please test them in a simulation environment. You could still get surprises because some third-party services might not follow the standards. That can happen. Happened to us once. We brought one operator network and the whole thing banged in production, but it was not our fault. It was another third-party service which had not done the homework properly. So you cannot always avoid or secure all risks, but you can already do a lot of risk control in a simulated environment where you simulate the third-party service. The other alternative is talk to them. The third-party service is as interested as you that the customer is happy. So we had third-party services where they gave us beforehand the products for pre-testing. So try to talk to them because they might want also a happy customer. What is the business appetite for risk related to context and user base? Appetite for risk. Yeah, of course, when you test in production, there's a risk. Surely better as when you test at home in your pre-production simulation. Yes, but for me, it's not about appetite. No testing is as good as production testing. It doesn't matter how good you do run continuous integration, how good you simulate your environment, how good you run integration tests. No testing is as good as one in production. So you might have, for example, integration as a service, which some operators telecommunication operators are offered from companies like Ericsson, where one of our engineers goes and runs the test on site together with the customer. So both learn very quick. So I don't see as appetite for risk. I see as ensuring if there is any problem, we find it as soon as possible, and we don't leave it to the customer to find it at midnight on a Sunday. That's what we're trying to avoid with testing in production. How do you convince business to let you test in production? You have to buy in the trust of business. I will recommend create an excellent continuous integration. Number one, once we have an excellent continuous integration in place, create a continuous deployment environment with a simulator. And once we show off to business, look, we have done our homework, and see if there's a failure, we have a recovery procedure in place, which happens right away within milliseconds, we're back to the older version, then the business is going to let you test in production. But I don't think if you just knock on the door of the CEO and say, hey, Joe, you know what? I thought about testing in production. Oh, yes, please go. I don't think this is going to happen. I wouldn't do it. I will ask, show me your continuous integration setup, or show me your environment and your simulation for continuous deployment. What is the recovery strategy? Make a demo. Okay, guys, you can test in production. Can we hot fix? What was hot fix again?
It was clarified that it's a quick fix.
That is part of, I will say most of the cases, of course, you first do a recovery. If you deploy something and it goes wrong, you first recover the version before, and then you can do a hot fix. Hot fixing in production while it is failing really very much depends on the sector. I know it for most of the sectors that you first fall back. We have here a comment of Matthew. Continuous delivery means automated delivery. So if you use Octopus Deploy or similar and can release automatically, it's enough. We didn't talk about automation yet. I only had 10 minutes and I was not prepared. So don't ask for miracles.
Nobody would say you don't seem prepared, Almudena. You definitely are prepared.
I've been all night waiting for my moment. Yes, Matthew, you're right. Automation, we didn't mention it yet. And yes, it's one of the basics. When I say we have to do the homework beforehand, that will be also one important homework. Without automation, don't do manual testing in production, please don't. And here at Tesco, we release every single day or multiple times a day as we have multiple services. Perfect. So please, if it's working and you're doing it and it's running fine, don't stop doing it because I said something else. So Spotify is also releasing the different areas of the interface every couple of hours. I don't know how, but they do it and it's working fine. So mostly when we're having these talks about going to test into production, we're speaking about some traditional companies we might not have microservice setup. So we have to think of the steps. But yes, if it's running, great. I'm happy to hear from other examples. What do we have left? How do you test integration? Very much depends on the customer, and very much depends on the sector. If the customer is not willing to give you some area, for example, you have it by the gaming. In the gaming sectors, you have it that they might take Friday evening the Asian market, for example, and there you can test in production. So you have a sector where you can do some canary releases and some areas that is perfect, there you can test integration. If you don't have that, if you cannot say, okay, at midnight for the South European market, we try to run some tests, integration tests there, because there's less usability at that point in time. I will strongly recommend to create a simulation environment, like I mentioned with VMware. That's the one I know. There are probably other ones. How do we build the feedback loops with testing into production? I personally recommend, when we speak about testing in production, is not letting the customer alone run the test, but do testing as a service, to be an engineer joins the customer and they run the testing in production together, or you run the tests and the customer observes it. But make sure this testing into production is run by the people who have created the product. And then you automatically have the feedback, and it's the most valuable feedback. Whoever from Ericsson went to production to put some node in place came back to our development environment with fantastic feedback. So please, if you can send your developers to the customer to do this testing, it's the best cross functionality you can run. 2 minutes left. What do we have? I make it. How not to compromise quality. Again, we come back to our homework. Quality is built in from the very moment you touch your computer to write code. There has to be quality built in with pairing, with unit tests, with continuous integration. So don't just write some code and bring it to production. Do the homework beforehand. That code had some pairing, had been reviewed, unit tests run, continuous integration. There is where the quality has to be there. Because when you test into production, you assume you're going to find 0 faults. How do you decide if you use the cloud versus data security issues? Yeah, I live in Germany. Germans are very data secure oriented. We have all the, we used to have in Ericsson a piece of hardware where all the data of any telephone talk on German trains was being held because they didn't want to have it outside Europe. So yes, where is the cloud? Very good point. There is a lot of contracting now ongoing. For example, I know an Austrian bank who has all their data in all their data of an Austrian bank is in the Amazon cloud. We're speaking about an Austrian bank, and they have the data in the Amazon cloud. So the cloud providers are also learning, and they are offering very good security setup. Cloud is not that dangerous anymore. And if a bank in Austria puts everything on the Amazon cloud, they have checked on the security, believe me. How do we define quality? Quality for me is the very moment the developer touches one, ¿cómo se dice? Tecla, taste. Jenny, die Tastatur, teclas in the laptop. How do you call them?
Keyboard.
The keyboard. In the very moment the developer touches the keyboard, for me that is the quality starts. No, quality is 0 faults in production. When we're saying testing in the production, we're assuming we're going to find no problem at all.